Together with the European Parliament, the Council of the European Union is the main decision-making body of that union. It should be really understood as a representation of national member states, of national interests, a kind of bargaining club that pushes forward the European integration project. The Council of the European Union, also known as the Council, is however not to be confounded with the European Council. I will talk about this in a second, which is part of the European Union, but also not with the Council of Europe, which is actually a human rights organization which is outside of the European Union. Returning to the Council of the European Union, this is really based on government ministers from national countries meeting up, discussing, amending, adopting laws together on a European level. And these council meetings take mostly place in Brussels, so they're also part of the Brussels bubble, but they also for 3 months a year take place in Luxembourg. Why do we have this type of institution, a council of ministers? Well, in the early days, so still in the days of the Schuman Declaration of the 9th of May of 1950, there were a number of countries that were concerned about the interests of small countries. So the so-called Benelux countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, they actually asked for an institution that would represent each singular member state and hence would then also protect smaller member states. Well, also other members of the early integration project, particularly France and Germany, had problems with what they understood as potential excesses of supranationality, so a European Union being completely autonomous in a way from the European member states. So they instituted this, what is sometimes called intergovernmental body. So how is the Council composed? As one can imagine, the Council has 27 members, as the governments of 27 EU member states are represented there. And it meets very much in sectoral, let's say subject-oriented compositions based on the topic of a specific session. So for instance, ministers of agriculture meet a number of times a year, or the ministers of economics meet together for a number of times a year. How does it work today, the Council? The presidency of the Council is an interesting part of the institution because it's a rotating presidency. So every 6 months the presidency changes. There's one from January to June, and then in July until December there's a new one. Currently it's Belgium, the next one will be Hungary, and the presidency of the Council has the prerogative to organize the various meetings at the ministerial level to set the political agenda. So today, since a very important moment in European integration, the so-called Lisbon Treaty of 2009, the standard voting method in the Council of the European Union is what they call qualified majority voting. So it's not anymore that every member state has a full-blown veto to block any type of policy that's proposed, but rather if there is a sizable majority, which means around 55% of the member states need to back it up, that's 15 out of 27 member states, and they must represent at least 65% of the European population. In those cases, policies can be pushed forward. And this is by now used for around 80% of European legislation. However, a blocking minority can still stop specific policies. A decision can be rejected by 4 countries if they represent at least 35% of the population. Anyhow, unanimity, so let's call it the veto right of singular member states, is still an issue. There's still a huge debate about whether unanimity should not be completely abandoned. And it still exists in important policy fields like common foreign and security policy, defense policy, citizenship, including granting of new rights to EU citizens, and also a very topical discussion about enlargement and EU membership. I briefly mentioned before another institution that is related to the Council of Ministers, but is actually a different institution, the so-called European Council. These two types of councils are actually in the same building in Brussels, but the specificity of the European Council is that it is made up of the presidents and the prime ministers of member states. So it's a really kind of club of bosses. And this institution has its own president, which is in a certain way the president of the European Union, a presidency for 2.5 years. Currently it's the Belgian Charles Michel. This institution sort of exists informally since 1974. It's a bit of an informal initiative of the member states themselves, but since 2009 it has become a formal institution of the European Union, and it's the most media-savvy, visible part perhaps of the European Union as such, particularly when we have these so-called European summits, for instance discussing the enlargement of the European Union, offering accession to the Ukraine, for instance. And these summits are particularly interesting because they often end in all-night sessions that finish at 4 o'clock in the morning with major moments of drama. For instance, when dissenting leaders don't want to give their okay to a specific policy.